Chapter 1. Gabriel. So, is this how the other half lives? Gabriel Brooks turned to his right where his best friend, Noah Carter, sat in their limousine. He grinned to hear the awe in Noah's voice. The nerdy college kid he'd met at Harvard was his right-hand man at a growing biotech company, but he was still a small-town boy at heart. Not the other half, more like the 0.5%, he clarified with a hint of pride. Billionaires were an oddity, or more precisely, 1 in 3.7 million, the last time Gabriel had checked. And as one of the world's youngest billionaires at 35, he was an even rarer find. He ran a hand through his dark hair, feeling the weight of his gold Cartier watch, one of the few items he had splurged on. Having rushed from the office straight to the airport to catch his flight early this morning, he couldn't wait to change out of his suit and into some comfortable clothes. My mind is blown. Seriously. With his hands on either side of his head, Noah opened his fists and made a whooshing sound. This is going to be an amazing vacation. I can't wait to see your new place. They were on their way to the estate villa Gabriel had recently purchased on the Big Island of Hawaii. He had been showing Noah pictures of the elaborate resort on his phone as they traveled along Queen Kahumanu Highway. Noah gawked at photo after photo, including one of a lush green golf course flanked by tall, swaying palm trees. Another picture showed off a covered lanai and a private infinity-edged swimming pool with a view of a sparkling blue ocean. The property even had its own tropical floral gardens. Even though Gabriel wasn't a stranger to such lavishness, the beauty of the place still made his jaw drop. He could only imagine how Noah felt. Thanks for asking me to come, Noah remarked. You're sure it's okay for me to crash your family vacation? Gabriel chuckled. Of course. Lorene actually said she prefers you to me and Devin any day. She said that? If Gabriel wasn't mistaken, Noah's complexion had reddened at the mention of his sister's name. You're like an honorary brother. Besides, I want you to see this trip as a small token of my appreciation for all you're doing to help boost the company's productivity. Bringing you on board was the best business decision I made last year. He raised the glass of champagne he'd been drinking for a toast. Here's to health, happiness, and more groundbreaking medical breakthroughs. I'll drink to that, Noah chimed in as he clinked his glass with Gabriel's, then took a sip. Gabriel leaned back in his plush seat and marveled at how good he had it these days. A practically endless supply of money to pay the bills. His dream car, a sleek jet black Bugatti Veyron. A 14,000 square foot mansion in Atherton, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the Bay Area. And now a fully staffed and elegantly furnished vacation home. Life hadn't always been handed to him on a silver platter though. Up until 5 years ago, he'd been a researcher at a startup company in Silicon Valley. Little did he know his whole life would change after his father passed and left him, along with his 2 siblings, $1 billion each. The secrets had all come out in an attorney's office on a summer day much like today. Their father had done well in his lifetime, moving up in the ranks at a tech company until he made it to CFO. Not one to spend money on anything frivolous, he had invested his earnings in real estate, then kept the fortune he'd made a secret from the entire family. Gabriel appreciated how their father had raised them to value education and hard work. Becoming a billionaire hadn't changed the way he used money, he still counted every penny. The extra zeros in his portfolio did allow him the freedom, however, to pursue his passions. He'd founded Neogene Corporation with his brother Devin, to help further cancer research. He had also started traveling more. Hawaii was just one destination where he frequented, but it was his favorite. There's one more thing we should have drank to, Noah piped up suddenly. One more? Gabriel quirked a brow. I'm pretty sure I covered all the bases. What else is there? Love. Crinkles appeared around Noah's hazel eyes as he smiled. When he spotted Gabriel's droll expression, he clarified further. I'm talking about a woman, Gabe. All our Harvard mates except for the 2 of us are married. We're officially in our mid-30s now. It's time to start thinking about settling down. Don't you agree? Love? Gabriel spat out the word as if it were coated with bitterness, not to mention sprinkled with regret. He'd been burned enough times by women who had dated him only for his money. I don't do love. Or marriage. Work keeps me busy enough and satisfied, he added for good measure. The whole idea of relying on a person for fulfillment sounded desperate and foolish. He was neither. I have everything I want. Sure, you have everything money can buy. But what about the things you can't buy, like the support of a strong, faithful woman? Gabriel scoffed. I've yet to meet such a woman. If one does exist, I'd be willing to pay money to meet her. Their limousine slowed and came to a stop. Gabriel's shoulders relaxed, relieved to see Noah's attention shift to the beautiful scenery outside. Seconds later, Their driver opened the door and greeted them with fresh lays as they stepped out. "Aloha, Mr. Brooks, Mr. Carter. Please go ahead. I'll bring your luggage in for you." Gabriel thanked the driver, then took a long, deep breath. The sweet scent of plumeria flowers filled his senses, calming him. This vacation was just what he needed. Some time away from the office. Disconnecting from the pressures of board meetings, financial statements, and sales forecasts. Just him, his siblings, and his best friend spending time together in paradise. A wave of peace washed over him as he began leading Noah up the walkway toward the villa. "Come on, let's get settled in. Since Laureen and Devin aren't arriving until tonight, you can have first dibs on any room you want." He winked at Noah as he opened the front door. Upon entering, Gabriel's gaze swept the large sitting room, taking in the familiar vaulted ceiling, stone flooring, and the stunning ocean views from every angle. His eyes stopped, however, when they landed on the one thing, or person rather, that didn't belong. A petite blonde woman stood next to a large hand-carved Hawaiian drum, wearing nothing but a white robe. Her face was natural looking, devoid of any makeup. Other than some dark circles under her eyes, she had a healthy flush to her cheeks. Jaw slack, she gaped at them and shrieked, "Who are you, and what are you doing in my house?" Heat rushed up Gabriel's neck as memories from high school suddenly flooded his mind. It had been over a dozen years since he'd last seen her, but he'd recognized those big blue eyes and pouty lips anywhere. Seraphina James, Miss Trust Fund baby herself. What was his high school nemesis doing in his vacation home?
Chapter 2. Seraphina. "I beg your pardon," the unsmiling man standing before her touted. "This is my house." Seraphina James pulled her robe tightly around her torso and crossed her arms for extra protection. She'd just taken a refreshing dip in the pool and was on her way to the kitchen for a snack. The last thing she expected to see was two strange men in her foyer. Her first thought was that her parents had sent them here to look for her, but she hadn't told anyone about this weekend trip. Had they walked into the wrong villa? Or worse, were they trying to rob her? She highly doubted that though. They were too handsome to be thieves. Especially the taller man with the wavy brown hair and piercing eyes. She swallowed hard as her body warmed under his gaze. Arg. What was she doing? She shook her head free of the thoughts invading her mind and tried to focus on the issue at hand. What had they been talking about? Oh yes, the house. No, it's not. This is my house, Seraphina reiterated with a firmer tone, the one she used when she gave orders at work. At least it is for another week, while it's in escrow. I don't know who you are, but you need to leave. The taller man opened his mouth, but she cut him off before he could speak. Before I call the authorities. Capiche? The men looked at each other, seeming to communicate with only their eyebrows. She wasn't sure how they were related, if they were. The two guys were dressed as differently as possible, one in casual shorts and a t-shirt, the other one in a suit and tie. The latter man looked hot in his attire, both literally and figuratively. Seraphina narrowed her eyes as she studied his face. She couldn't place him, but there was something very familiar about the way he smirked. The last time she'd seen such haughtiness was back in high school. Her jaw dropped in shock. I do know you. You're Gabriel Brooks, the guy who stole the valedictorian title right out from under me. He scoffed loudly. I beat you fair and square by 4 points. At least I'm not the one squatting in someone else's home. Seraphina's cheeks heated. Did he forget who she was? Her family owned James & James, the largest multinational consumer goods corporation, making her one of the youngest billionaires in the world. She owned a dozen properties, for goodness sakes. She'd only decided to sell this particular place after she found one twice its size on a Caribbean island. How dare Gabriel accuse her of something so desperate and distasteful as squatting? She shouldn't be surprised, considering how jealous he'd been of her and their wealthy classmates. He and his siblings were among the few students who had attended their elite prep school via scholarships. I resent that ridiculous claim. If anyone's squatting, it's you. How else would you be able to afford to stay here, Gabriel? If looks could kill, Seraphina was sure her heart would stop beating any minute now. She saw Gabriel's friend pull him back. The man then stepped forward and placed himself in between the two of them. Hi, I'm Gabe's friend, Noah. I don't believe we've met. Seraphina eyed Noah's outstretched hand before shaking it. At least Gabriel had something going for him, good taste in friends, other than his handsome face, which she really ought not to be staring at. Blinking quickly, she returned her attention to Noah. If Gabriel wouldn't listen to reason, maybe his friend would. I'm Seraphina, but you can call me Sarah. That's a privilege reserved for my friends, she added with a glare in Gabriel's direction. It's nice to meet you, Sarah. Noah smiled graciously. I believe we have a misunderstanding of sorts here that can be cleared up easily enough. You're in the process of selling this place, and Gabe was the one who bought it. His realtor said he was welcome to move in today. What did yours say? Mine, Seraphina tapped her chin with one red-polished finger as she tried to remember the conversation. I believe she said I had until July 17th to move out. Or was it the 7th, which would be today? She chewed on her lower lip, truly unsure of the answer. She'd taken her realtor's call right after a board meeting where she had learned some devastating news that affected her both professionally and personally. The shocking announcement had caught her completely off guard. Unfortunately, she hadn't had the clarity of mind in that moment to write the date down. Gabriel's brows shot up. You remembered wrong. It was the 7th, not the 17th. Seraphina bristled at his haughty tone. He sure had changed. The teenager she remembered had been a pain in her behind, but more humble than the man standing before her. If he was truly the owner of this villa, he must have come into some serious money since high school. Whatever the case, she hated the fact that Gabriel was winning this argument. He promptly strode over, cell phone in hand, and presented it for her to read. This email from my realtor proves it. She took the phone from him, inhaling sharply as her fingers brushed his. Had he felt the jolt of electricity that passed between them? If so, he didn't let on. Instead, he tapped on the phone screen and declared once again, "The house is mine, oh fiery one." The grin on Gabriel's face stole Seraphina's breath away. He had some gall to use the old nickname he'd given her, even though by definition, it was what her name meant. For a moment, she spotted his playful side, the one that had made sparring with him so much fun. She had loved how different he was from the other kids at school, that he didn't come from old money or have a sense of entitlement. Instead, he had worked hard and earned his way to the top. She'd never tell him this, but she hadn't minded losing the title of valedictorian to him. But she hated the idea of losing this house to him when he was being such a jerk. She supposed it was a good thing she was seeing his true colors. Old feelings she once had for Gabriel were creeping up again, making it hard to think straight. The sooner she could leave this place, the better. She desperately needed to escape the presence of this pretentious man.
Chapter 3. Gabriel. What are you waiting for? Huh? Gabriel blinked as Noah's question traveled through one ear to the other. It seemed to bypass his brain because all he could focus on was the woman sauntering out of the room, her long legs disappearing as she rounded the corner. Never in a million years had he expected to see Seraphina again. Sure, they both lived in Silicon Valley, but it wasn't like they ran in the same social circles. Not that he socialized much to begin with. During high school, Seraphina had always kept up with the Joneses, or in her case, anyone who wore designer shoes and drove the fastest cars. She'd been a pampered little thing with her false lashes and manicured nails. Rumor had it her father had even paid for a nose job the summer after graduation. From the looks of it, Gabriel guessed that one was true. Her pert nose was just about perfect, along with the rest of her face. She was what his brother would call drop-dead gorgeous. But that attitude? No surgery in the world would be able to fix that. Gabriel realized his friend was still waiting for him to answer. He had no idea what Noah's question was though. Sorry, what did you say? The driver brought in our bags. Care to show me to my room? Oh right. He glanced around for a moment to gather his bearings. Too many late nights at work, coupled with the weariness of a 5-hour flight, had his thoughts jumbled. Getting into a verbal sparring match with Seraphina hadn't helped either. Her presence reminded him of how hard he had worked back in high school to prove that he was just as good as the rich kids. Little did he know he would one day be like them, sans the streak of entitlement. He led Noah through the bright and airy living room with its large windows facing the Pacific and down a long hallway. The path took them to a guest bedroom, the smallest of the 4 bedrooms in the 7,000 square foot house. Small was a relative word, considering it had its own sitting room and bathroom. The walk-in closet was larger than the bedroom he'd had growing up. He knew most people would jump at the chance to stay there. Noah was obviously one of them. He took one step into the room and declared it his. "This is perfect. I'll take it, if that's okay. Are you sure you don't want to check out the other rooms? There's also another guest room similar to this one, a secondary master suite, and a grand master bedroom suite. The suites are much larger and have their own door to the pool in back. This one is as big as my whole apartment. Anyways, Laureen would appreciate having more space." "You're right. Her shoe collection alone needs its own room." Gabriel rolled his eyes. It was a wonder his sister still qualified to be a billionaire, considering how much she spent on retail therapy. Fortunately, she had a knack for picking the right stocks to invest in. At least she made an effort to earn money, unlike a certain woman he knew who depended on her father to provide. He shook his head. How had Seraphina squirmed her way into his thoughts again? Noah set his luggage on the floor and placed his laptop bag on the king-sized bed. He eyed Gabriel curiously. "So, I take it you and Sarah went to the same high school. I'm surprised you never mentioned her before." Gabriel shrugged as he took off his tie and unbuttoned the top 3 buttons of his white dress shirt. He looked out the open window, savoring the clean scent of the ocean breeze wafting in. "We weren't exactly friends. We didn't get along, as you can imagine. Most of the time we were after the same awards and rankings. She was a worthy competitor though, I have to give her that. Perhaps that's why he'd had a soft spot for her, despite their strife. Seraphina had the power to both infuriate and intrigue him at the same time. I assume she's well off?" Noah chuckled. "That's probably an understatement." He turned to face Noah. "Well, if you used any personal care products today, you have her family to thank for it. Her dad's Maxwell James." Noah's jaw dropped. "As in the founder of James and James? I buy their stuff all the time, lotion, mouthwash, pain meds. Wow. She's gotta be loaded." "Yep, loaded and full of it." Gabriel scoffed. "I doubt if she's ever worked a day in her life like the rest of us mere mortals do. Probably travels all the time and takes extravagant shopping trips on her daddy's dime." Noah frowned. "That's a bit harsh, don't you think, Gabe? She didn't come across as a spoiled brat. Rich kids are all the same. I should know. I grew up with them. Or apart from them, to be more exact." His department store labels and hand-me-down car had never allowed him to penetrate their exclusive club. A bitter taste coated his mouth as old feelings of jealousy tightened his chest. "Hold on a minute." Noah pulled his phone from his pocket and tapped on the screen. "Seraphina James, that name sounds familiar. I'm pretty sure I read some news about her recently. Let me find that article. Could it be that Sarah had made the pages of some celebrity magazine?" Gabriel imagined someone with her clout could easily mingle with actors or models. Then again, Noah was the last person he'd expect to be reading tabloids. Business-related news was more his style. "Here it is," Noah declared as he read from his phone. "James and James to gain new board member. Effective August 1st, Seraphina James will take her father's place as CEO." Gabriel quirked a brow. He couldn't have heard Noah right. "Come again?" "Sarah does more than shopping, Gabe. She's set to become the head of one of the world's biggest companies." Noah's voice was filled with wonder. "I'm impressed." "Who's impressed?" Gabriel spun around and came face to face with the very woman they were talking about. The smirk on Sarah's face revealed she had overheard their conversation. He crossed his arms across his chest and set his jaw. "No one. You really should let other people speak for themselves, Gabriel." She flashed him a wry smile. Gabriel swallowed hard. He was having trouble speaking himself with how beautiful she looked leaning against the doorframe. Her hair was clipped up, allowing a few soft tendrils to fall around her heart-shaped face. She had changed out of her robe into a white blazer, a lace top, and tailored shorts that showed off her golden tan. Once again, her long shapely legs called out for his attention. He had to tear his eyes from them to meet her gaze. "I was just telling Gabe how impressed I am with your job advancement," Noah piped up. He had no idea you were taking over James and James. Seraphina pursed her full, red lips as she gave Gabriel a stern once-over. "There's a lot he doesn't know about me. But we'll have to save that conversation for some other time. I just wanted to let you know that my staff has tidied up the place for you and my driver will be picking me up shortly. It was nice meeting you, Noah." "Nice meeting you, too." With sarcasm dripping from her voice, she remarked, "Congrats on the house, Gabriel. It's all yours." Before he could say a word, she left the room, the sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor. He clenched his jaw, feeling irritation seep back into his body. Without thinking, his own feet followed her down the hall. He chalked it up to an old habit he'd had when they were kids. The last one to speak always won the argument. There was no way he'd let her walk away now without getting in one more word.
Chapter 4. Seraphina. Leaving so soon? Gabriel called out from behind. Seraphina slowed her steps until he caught up to her. She purposely didn't turn around, lest the blush creeping into her cheeks gave her away. Back in the room, she'd gotten a closer look at him. The sight of his broad shoulders and the pectoral muscles peeking out from his unbuttoned shirt had just about done her in. She'd had to work hard to not gawk at him like some lovesick teenager. And just when she thought she'd made a quick exit, here he was following her. Gabriel edged his way beside her in the hall. He pinned his gaze on her and smirked. "Thought you could get away with the last word, did you? Is that what this is about?" She rolled her eyes. He might look like a handsome hunk of a man, but he was still a kid at heart. "I thought you couldn't wait for me to vacate the premises. I was doing you a favor by leaving. Always doing things for the benefit of others, aren't you?" He scoffed as he leaned in. "Don't forget, I know your MO. You'll do anything to get ahead of the game. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that you made it to CEO already. But for the record, I got there before you." She inhaled sharply, put off by the edge in his tone. Her head spun as she got a whiff of his musky, masculine scent. All the worries that had been weighing her down suddenly vanished. His dark brown eyes were so intense, she felt herself melting under his gaze. Or maybe that was just her body's reaction to his closeness, because he was close. Almost close enough to kiss if she tipped her head up just so. He suddenly stepped back and cleared his throat. She was pretty sure he'd felt the fire between them too, judging by the chagrin on his face. It was definitely time to head out now, before she did anything she'd regret. "Look, I'm not here to compete with you, Gabe. There are more important things in life than being on top. If you haven't learned that by now, God help you." Her voice trailed off as she shot him a look of pity. "Don't go turning the tables on me," he retorted. "I know what you're doing, trying to make me feel like you're better than me." "What? That's not what I meant. I was merely saying that if climbing the ladder is all you're interested in, you've got a sad life ahead of you." He balked. "You sure have some gall, Seraphina. Are you telling me you don't care about becoming CEO?" She crossed her arms, her posture stiffening. "No, I don't. I don't buy that." Seraphina bristled. He sure was doing his all to push her buttons. She was pretty sure her next comment would get him off her back. "I don't care about being CEO. Not when it means my father isn't able to continue in that role because he's dying." She immediately regretted divulging such personal information to him. No one outside of their family was supposed to know the real reason for her sudden promotion. "What? What do you mean he's dying?" Seraphina dropped her gaze. Hot tears gathered in her eyes, threatening to spill out. "He just found out he has cancer. A form of leukemia. There's not much the doctors can do." "I'm so sorry." Gabriel placed a hand on her arm. "I had no idea. Are you sure you've exhausted all your options?" She nodded as she met his eyes, surprised to see compassion there. "We've looked into everything. I've pretty much accepted that there are some things in life that money can't buy." "So much for being rich, huh?" She laughed bitterly. "So, no, I don't want to take over the family business. I'd gladly give up my position as CEO to have my father's health back. I'd even give up all the money in my trust fund and all my properties and investments for more time with him." Silence ensued before the corners of Gabriel's mouth twitched. He dropped his hand to his side and remarked, "Sure, you would." A flash of anger hit her to hear the sarcasm in his voice. How dare he? He had some nerve to imply she was lying. This was her father they were talking about. She took a step forward and jabbed a finger into his firm chest. What is that supposed to mean? Nothing, he replied. Spit it out. He flashed her a look of indifference. It's just that some things are easier said than done. You grew up with a silver spoon in that pretty mouth of yours. I doubt if you could give up your wealth so easily. Besides, if you truly wanted to spend time with your father, what are you doing here in Hawaii by yourself? Seraphina clenched her jaw so tightly, it was a wonder her teeth didn't crack. You're some piece of work, Gabriel Brooks. You have no right to judge me or my intentions. And I don't need to prove myself to you. We're done here. I'm not wasting another one of my precious breaths on you. She raised her chin in defiance. You can go on with the rest of your meaningless life for all I care. You arrogant, selfish, conceited. He took her finger with his large palm and held it tight. His eyes darkened as they zeroed in on her mouth. Yes. She swallowed hard as she racked her brain for the right words. Her heart raced in her chest as she spat out, you know what you are. Good grief. She almost rolled her eyes. What was it about this man that made her reason like a 5-year-old? Gabriel chuckled. I know you're at a loss for words around me. He puffed his chest out with pride. If he were a tropical bird, he would have fluffed up his feathers in a mating dance by now. You still have a thing for me, don't you? Her jaw dropped. How in the world did he know? A thing for you? The only thing I have for you is disgust. You're more cocky than any man I've ever met. Is this what money's done to you? I liked the old Gabriel a whole lot better. At least the one I grew up with had a heart. She tried pulling her finger out of his hold, only to have him grip it tighter. May I? He furrowed his brows and immediately released her finger. His expression grew pensive, almost remorseful, as he stepped away. I need to go. I'll see you around, Sarah. She watched in confusion as he edged past her and walked away. Obviously, something she'd said had touched a nerve. Gone was the boy who used to love teasing her. In his place was a brooding man she didn't understand. Perhaps it was better this way. As it were, she was having a hard enough time not falling for him all over again. She released a heavy sigh and continued out the door and out of Gabriel Brooks's life.
Chapter 5. Gabriel. Yo bro, what's up with you tonight? Gabriel's brother Devin asked as they watched the sun set from their private stretch of beach behind the villa. What do you mean? Gabriel eyed the tall man who was sprawled out on the chaise lounge beside him. His brother and sister had arrived just an hour earlier after dinner, and it hadn't taken Devin long to notice his foul mood. It was ironic how he'd come to Hawaii to escape, but he was feeling more bogged down mentally than when he'd been in the office that morning. Devin bit off a sugared champagne grape, one of several strung onto a metal stick that the staff had prepared for them. You're strangely quiet. Does this have something to do with the woman you bumped into today? Gabriel shot him a look of surprise. How did he know about Seraphina? Did Noah tell you about her? Actually, he mentioned her to Lorene, who mentioned her to me. He stretched out his arms and clasped his hands behind his head. Is this the same girl you were going to ask to prom senior year? I can't believe she's the one you bought this place from. Talk about a small world. He scoffed. Leave it to his brother to bring up a fact he'd been happy to leave in the past. Yes, she's the one. Although, I'm glad the other guy asked her before I could. He probably saved me from a lifetime of heartache. Seraphina hadn't been the only one with feelings outside the friend zone. Gabriel had fallen hard for her as well, maybe even loved her. But he'd only been a kid, so he talked himself out of pursuing her. It had been safer to be enemies instead. While they'd always egged the other person on, it had been for fun. Their chemistry together was playful, even flirtatious. Today's banter, however, had crossed the line. The last word Seraphina said still took him aback. Was she right? Was he a different person than the one she knew back in high school? A lifetime of heartache? Devin smirked. I thought you just wanted to ask her out, not marry her. Yeah, that's what I meant, he mumbled out of the corner of his mouth, hoping his brother would drop the topic. Gabriel exhaled deeply. He should have been happy Seraphina had left his place without a look back, not thinking about how close he'd been to kissing her. One whiff of her sweet perfume, the same one she wore in high school, And he'd been a hormonal teenager again. The only thing that had kept him from claiming her mouth was the niggling feeling in the back of his mind that he still wasn't good enough for her. He'd never be good enough. So, what happened? Did you back her into a corner and try to win every argument? Devon flashed him a mischievous smile. Or did you finally come to your senses and let her have the last word? Gabriel gritted his teeth. He appreciated Devon's outspokenness in the office, but it was another matter to have his younger brother call him out on his personal life. Especially when what he said was true. I didn't try to win, okay, fine, I did. But I had to stand my ground. I can't have her thinking less of me because I wasn't born rich. We didn't have any of the privileges she had as a kid. We've had to work hard to make it in this world. She doesn't understand any of that. That's why I've always had to prove myself to her. Devon lowered his sunglasses onto the bridge of his nose and peered over them at Gabriel. He narrowed his eyes, a smirk curving up one side of his mouth. But bro, why does it matter to you anyway what she thinks? Gabriel blinked. His brother had a point. Why did he care about what Seraphina thought? Why did her opinion, out of all the women in the world, matter so much to him? The hair on the back of his neck stood on end as realization crashed down on him like the waves breaking on the shore. Perhaps all this time, he'd been trying to earn her respect, to impress her. Why? Because he wanted to be worthy of her love. Groaning, he stared up at the pink and orange streaks painting the sky. Instead of impressing her, he'd done the complete opposite. He'd pushed her away. As someone whose own father had passed away from an illness, he, of all people, should have been more empathetic to her situation. I can't believe I made those insensitive remarks about her and her father. Gabriel continued muttering under his breath. All this time, I've been thinking that she thought she was better than me, but I was doing the exact same thing. I thought I was better than all of them. I've not only been arrogant, I've been a hypocrite. Is this the jet lag talking, bro? Or did you have one too many cocktails at dinner? Chuckling, Devon pushed his shades up and sank back in his chair. Because I have no idea what you're going on and on about. Who are you better than? He faced Devon squarely. No one, absolutely no one. All right, now we're talking. Devon grinned. If you want my opinion, which you likely don't, but I'm going to tell you anyway, you should stop talking to yourself and go find this woman. She obviously means a lot to you to have gotten under your skin. His brother was right. Gabriel couldn't get Seraphina off his mind. She was the only woman he wanted. He was more than ready to surrender to his feelings for her, but he wanted to make amends first. He needed to. His father had raised him to be better than this. He shot to his feet and plucked his cell phone from the pocket of his shorts. With a quick nod to Devon, he called out, I gotta go, before taking off for the house. Gabriel had an idea of how to get on Seraphina's good side. He was done competing with her. There was a bigger cause to fight for now. He had some calls to make, starting with the chief scientist at his company.
Chapter 6. Seraphina. Where are you, sweetheart? Are you all right? Seraphina ran her fingers across her laptop screen, tracing the outline of her father's face as she spoke to him on a video call. Her heart ached to see the worry lines on his forehead. With shoulders sagging, he looked unusually tired as he sat in his plush leather chair. I'm fine, Daddy. I'm at Uncle Larry's resort. I'm sorry I didn't tell you where I went. I know you're a grown adult, Sarah, and you don't have to answer to us anymore, but your mother's been worried sick. He paused as he ran a hand down his face. I know the news of my health wasn't easy to hear. But running away isn't the answer. Sniffling, she smoothed out her embroidered shift dress and tucked her legs under her. After she'd left Gabriel's villa yesterday, she escaped to the private Hawaiian island of one of her father's old friends. She snagged her favorite presidential suite on the top floor and spent the evening trying to make sense of her current situation. Gabriel's accusations had angered her, but more than that, they had hurt. She hated that he had called her out for being selfish and spoiled. He was right on both accounts, but he had left out one name that she deserved the most, coward. It was as her father said, she'd run away. She hadn't wanted to deal with the pressures of taking over the family business. Moreover, she didn't want to dwell on her father's diagnosis, on what it would mean to lose him. Instead, she'd escaped to a place she hoped would take her mind off her troubles, but ended up face to face with the one man who had a knack for pointing out her faults. She may have argued with Gabriel like a kid yesterday, but it was time to grow up. And time to face the facts. There were some things that money couldn't fix. Sure, wealth made life easier, but it wasn't a magic cure-all. It was up to her to make some changes, starting with her attitude. She could either pretend her problems didn't exist, or she could do something about them. Now as she sat in the suite's open-air lanai with a cup of her favorite coffee and the warm, salty breeze blowing over her bare legs, she felt ready to face her responsibilities. That's why she'd called her father first thing in the morning to make amends. "I'm done avoiding reality, Daddy," she replied confidently. "I'm coming home tomorrow, and I'll be ready to start the transition at work on Monday." His face brightened. "I'm glad to hear that. There's a lot we'll need to discuss. Not only regarding the company, but our family as well. I'd like us to spend some time together. There are plenty of things I've put off for the sake of work that I'd like to get around to doing. I hope it's not too late to start a bucket list." "Of course not, Daddy. It's never too late." She bit her lip to keep from crying. Her father might look strong on the outside, but she knew his body was failing him. "We'll make the most of the time we have, however much," or she choked on her last words and turned away from the camera. "Seraphina, sweetheart, I'm going to do all I can to stick around for as long as possible. You're not getting rid of your old man that easily." The playfulness in her father's tone gave her the courage to meet his gaze. "I'll hold you to your word, Daddy." He looked away from the camera for a moment as someone called out to him in his home office. When he turned back, he had a hopeful smile on his face. "Speaking of sticking around, there's a gentleman here, a scientist, who says he can help with that. He has some information about a new treatment for leukemia that the company he works for has been developing. Something to do with genetically engineering my own cells to fight the cancer." "What?" Her eyes widened at the news. "That's amazing. Does he think it'll work for you? What do we need to do to get you started on it?" Her father chuckled. "One step at a time, sweetheart. I only learned about it a few hours ago when his employer, Mr. Brooks, called. It seems you played a part in leading him to me." "Mr. Brooks?" Seraphina's heart skipped a beat at the mention of that name. It couldn't be. "Who are you talking about?" "Gabriel Brooks. He said you were classmates at Eden Prep. I'm surprised you never brought him around. He sounds like a fine young man." Seraphina shook her head in wonder. The fine young man her father was referring to had just chewed her out the day before. What was Gabe up to? Why was he suddenly being nice to her and her family? What did he have to gain from this? "We weren't exactly friends before, not that we are now. I just happened to bump into him here on the island and one thing led to another." "Did you say he has his own company?" "Yes, one of the leading biotech firms in the Bay Area. They specialize in cancer research. His father passed away a few years ago from pancreatic cancer." Her father furrowed his brows. "I thought you knew all this." "No, I didn't. We didn't have much time to talk yesterday." She winced, knowing that part wasn't true. She had been too focused on fighting Gabe to catch up on the past. She had no idea he'd lost his father. But even as she started feeling bad for him, her anger flared again. For someone who had walked in her shoes not long ago, he should have been more understanding. "You must trust him though," her father remarked, "to have divulged my health condition to him." "I didn't mean to say so much, Daddy. It just slipped out." "It's all right, Sarah," he reassured her. "I'm glad you did. This is the first piece of good news our family has gotten since my diagnosis. Mr. Brooks seems quite certain that I'm a perfect candidate for this procedure." The optimism in her father's voice made her heart ache. Sarah wanted this to be true as much as he did, but a part of her couldn't help but be suspicious. The Gabriel Brooks she knew only cared about himself. He'd do anything to win. Was this another scheme to get the upper hand? She reined in her doubt though and forced out a smile for her father's sake. "That's great, Daddy. I sure hope so." Seraphina ended the call a few minutes later with one plan in mind. Hope was one thing she wouldn't take a gamble on when it came to her father's health and happiness. It was time to pay Gabriel a visit and find out what he was up to.
Chapter 7. Gabriel. I don't know what you have planned, Gabriel, but you're not using my father as a pawn in your scheme. Gabriel balked. He'd only just opened the door to find Seraphina on the front steps of his villa, her face flushed and hands balled into tight fists at her sides. Good morning to you too, oh fiery one. What scheme are you referring to? Her eyes flashed in anger as she crossed her arms. With her 3-inch diamond-encrusted heels on, she was still half a head shorter than him, so she lifted her chin to stare into his face. The one where you're going to get my family's hopes up, only to let us down in the end. I know you spoke to my father about a treatment for his cancer. He actually believes there's a chance he'll get better. You got his hopes up, Gabe. How could you? Shocked and speechless didn't even begin to describe what Gabriel was feeling. Not only did she not appreciate the olive branch he'd handed her, she had broken it in two and burned it to ashes. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not playing games here. I was on the phone half the night with my scientists reviewing our research. After I got a hold of your father, he gave me access to his medical records. Everything looks good. I can't promise you a miracle, but this is the best chance we've got to give your father some more time. I'm just trying to help. Trying to help? Right. Seraphina took a step closer until they were nose to nose. She poked a manicured finger into his chest as she pinned him with her gaze. Her next words came out curt and harsh. You've never wanted to help me, Gabe. Especially after what you said to me yesterday, I can only imagine how little you think of me. You've always wanted to get the upper hand, the last word. You've never given me a reason to trust. Throwing all logic aside, Gabriel took her by the shoulders and claimed her mouth with his. He felt her lips move as she struggled to finish her sentence, then soften against his as she gave in to the kiss. Her arms went up around his neck, causing his skin to tingle. He pulled her flush against his body, splaying his hands on her waist. The heat from their contact drove him to deepen the kiss, to pour out all the pent-up emotions he'd had for this woman who made him both crazy and happy at the same time. In that moment, Gabriel realized there was one thing he and Seraphine did better than fighting, and that was kissing. And boy, did he enjoy kissing her. Only when Gabriel heard the sound of a woman clearing her throat behind them did he finally pull back. He turned around to find a petite redhead peering at them over her designer sunglasses with a huge grin on her face. Behind her stood Noah, giving him a thumbs up. Excuse us, we were just on our way out. She grabbed Noah's hand and pulled him through the front door. It was nice meeting you, Seraphina. She called out over her shoulder as the two of them disappeared down the driveway. Gabriel winced and cleared his throat. The ramifications of what he'd done started hitting him. He thought Seraphine had enjoyed their kiss, but the stony look on her face proved otherwise. That was my sister, Lorene. And you met Noah yesterday. She nodded, her cheeks still flushed from their kiss. She eyed him warily as she crossed her arms over her chest. What was that about? Why did you kiss me? Why? Was there a right answer to this question? Gabriel rubbed the back of his neck, missing the feel of Seraphine's hands there. If only they hadn't been rudely interrupted, he'd still be kissing her. Why else would a man kiss a woman? Because he's attracted to her. She scoffed. You're attracted to me? You sure have a funny way of showing it. Do you argue with every woman you're attracted to? Are you sure you weren't just trying to get the last word in, Gabe? Cut me off with a kiss so I couldn't talk anymore? That was not my intention. But now that you mention it, he paused to chuckle. It worked quite well. She narrowed her eyes at him, clearly not amused at his humor. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. That was a bad joke. She eyed him cautiously. You've never been on my side, Gabe. Why now? What changed? His expression sobered as he digested her words. She didn't trust him. He didn't blame her though. She was right that they'd always been at odds with each other. But it was time to put the past behind them once and for all. Sarah, would you please hear me out? I'd like to apologize. Her brows rose in surprise. Okay. I said some very harsh and insensitive things to you the last time we talked. I had no right to make those assumptions or accusations. I went too far in competing with you, and you have every right to call me a jerk, or worse. But I would like to leave the past behind us and start fresh. I hope you'll find it in your heart to forgive me. He seemed to have said the right words because she was speechless for once in her life. Gabriel rushed on to explain further. I would never play games with someone's life. I intend to help your father as much as I can. My offer is genuine, there are no strings attached. You can trust me. He waited expectantly, watching emotions he couldn't decipher flicker across her face. He and Seraphina may have shared an amazing kiss, But that didn't mean the past was water under the bridge. Would she give him a second chance?
Chapter 8. Seraphina. Seraphina stared into Gabriel's eyes, searching for any signs of betrayal. His dark brown eyes held her gaze, tenderness radiating from them. They silently pled with her to accept his offer, as crazy as it sounded. But could she trust a man who'd always fought against her? A light sensation tingled on her lips, making her gasp. The kiss. She couldn't forget the kiss. It had to be the best one of her life. Gabriel had held her with such care and poured more passion into that one touch than she'd ever experienced. It was no wonder, considering the tenacity with which he fought. He had always impressed her with his drive and hard work. When he wanted something, he went after it with all his heart. And this time, he wanted her. The thought made her body warm with anticipation. The heat spread to her limbs and enveloped her like a tropical breeze. She didn't need to wonder any longer how she felt, she knew with certainty. She and Gabriel were like two magnets of opposite polarities, always drawn to each other. Their attraction was as evident as the ocean was blue. Gabriel may have been her greatest opponent, but now that he was on her side, he would become her best ally. A man she could trust and love. Seraphina realized Gabriel had grown quiet, his forehead creased with worry. He was still waiting for her answer. She reached out and placed a hand on his chest, anxious to ease his fears. I appreciate your apology, Gabe. I'll admit I haven't been an angel either, even though my name might say otherwise. But I'm willing to put the past behind us if you are. Gabriel exhaled an audible sigh of relief. Thank you, Sarah. I'd like that very much. And thank you for helping my father. It means a lot to me that you would go out of your way to reach out to him. I'm sorry I called you a heartless liar, she added sheepishly. A heartless liar? I don't remember you saying that. She patted him on the chest before dropping her hand. Oh, the thought crossed my mind several times. I just had the decency to not say it out loud. But since we're starting fresh, I wanted to get it out there. You know, clean slate and all. Chuckling, he shook his head. All right then. Is there anything else you want to bring up? She pretended to ponder for a moment. No, nothing else. How about you? Me? He cleared his throat loudly. Well, since you asked, there is an important question I have for you. His nervous smile tugged at her heartstrings. She'd never seen Gabriel look so unsure of himself. This side of him made her fall for him even more. Yes? What is it, Gabe? A glimmer of hope lit up his dark eyes. After a moment of hesitation, he stated, Will you have dinner with me tonight? Her eyes widened. Are you asking me out? I am. On a date? Of course. I'll pick you up, pay for our meal, drop you off, the whole 9 yards. Happiness flooded her heart, but she bit back a smile. Was it wrong that she wanted to tease him a little? She tapped a finger on her bottom lip and mused, Let me see. Do I have any plans tonight that would be more important than going out with a gorgeous man who still has a thing for me? Crinkles appeared around his eyes as he laughed. Who said I had a thing for you? I think your kiss made that pretty clear. It was kind of amazing. So you enjoyed it, did you? His confidence had returned in full force. She rolled her eyes as he puffed out his chest. Enjoy is a relative term. If I had to compare it to swimming with sharks, I'd say kissing you might rank a little higher. A little? I'm fairly certain you still have a thing for me, too. Seraphina wrinkled her nose playfully. You'll have to wait until our date to find out. I'll take that as a yes for dinner then? Yes. Great, wonderful. I know you're planning on returning to California today, so I'll pick you up at home. All right. In the meantime, I'd be happy to give you a play-by-play of our kiss, so you can remember how much you liked it. She quirked a brow. Really? And remind you of how much you liked me. You're not going to stop talking, are you? Is this your way of making sure I never get the last word in? With a sly wink, he replied, "You catch on quick, oh fiery one." She crossed her arms, pretending to pout. "Go on now so I can get ready for my hot date tonight." A wide grin spread across his face. "So, you think I'm hot too? Goodbye, Gabe." He blew her a kiss before he turned to go. "I'll see you in a few hours, Sarah." She couldn't wait. But could she trust a man who'd always fought against her? A light sensation tingled on her lips, making her gasp. The kiss. She couldn't forget the kiss. It had to be the best one of her life. Gabriel had held her with such care and poured more passion into that one touch than she'd ever experienced. It was no wonder, considering the tenacity with which he fought. He had always impressed her with his drive and hard work. When he wanted something, he went after it with all his heart. And this time, he wanted her. The thought made her body warm with anticipation. The heat spread to her limbs and enveloped her like a tropical breeze. She didn't need to wonder any longer how she felt, she knew with certainty. She and Gabriel were like two magnets of opposite polarities, always drawn to each other. Their attraction was as evident as the ocean was blue. Gabriel may have been her greatest opponent, but now that he was on her side, he would become her best ally. A man she could trust and love. Seraphina realized Gabriel had grown quiet, his forehead creased with worry. He was still waiting for her answer. She reached out and placed a hand on his chest, anxious to ease his fears. "I appreciate your apology, Gabe. I'll admit I haven't been an angel either, even though my name might say otherwise. But I'm willing to put the past behind us if you are." Gabriel exhaled an audible sigh of relief. "Thank you, Sarah. I'd like that very much. And thank you for helping my father. It means a lot to me that you would go out of your way to reach out to him. I'm sorry I called you a heartless liar," she added sheepishly. "A heartless liar? I don't remember you saying that." She patted him on the chest before dropping her hand. "Oh, the thought crossed my mind several times. I just had the decency to not say it out loud. But since we're starting fresh, I wanted to get it out there. You know, clean slate and all." Chuckling, he shook his head. "All right then. Is there anything else you want to bring up?" She pretended to ponder for a moment. "No, nothing else. How about you?" "Me?" He cleared his throat loudly. "Well, since you asked, there is an important question I have for you." His nervous smile tugged at her heartstrings. She'd never seen Gabriel look so unsure of himself. This side of him made her fall for him even more. "Yes? What is it, Gabe?" A glimmer of hope lit up his dark eyes. After a moment of hesitation, he stated, "Will you have dinner with me tonight?" Her eyes widened. "Are you asking me out?" "I am." "On a date?" "Of course. I'll pick you up, pay for our meal, drop you off, the whole 9 yards. Happiness flooded her heart, but she bit back a smile. Was it wrong that she wanted to tease him a little? She tapped a finger on her bottom lip and mused, "Let me see. Do I have any plans tonight that would be more important than going out with a gorgeous man who still has a thing for me?" Crinkles appeared around his eyes as he laughed. "Who said I had a thing for you? I think your kiss made that pretty clear. It was kind of amazing. So you enjoyed it, did you?" His confidence had returned in full force. She rolled her eyes as he puffed out his chest. "Enjoy is a relative term. If I had to compare it to swimming with sharks, I'd say kissing you might rank a little higher." "A little? I'm fairly certain you still have a thing for me, too." Seraphina wrinkled her nose playfully. "You'll have to wait until our date to find out." "I'll take that as a yes for dinner then?" "Yes." "Great, wonderful. I know you're planning on returning to California today, so I'll pick you up at home." "All right. In the meantime, I'd be happy to give you a play-by-play of our kiss, so you can remember how much you liked it." She quirked a brow. "Really? And remind you of how much you liked me. You're not going to stop talking, are you?" Is this your way of making sure I never get the last word in? With a sly wink, he replied, "You catch on quick, fiery one." She crossed her arms, pretending to pout. "Go on now so I can get ready for my hot date tonight." A wide grin spread across his face. "So, you think I'm hot, too? Goodbye, Gabe." He blew her a kiss before he turned to go. "I'll see you in a few hours, Sarah." She couldn't wait.
Chapter 9. Gabriel. Good evening, sir. A uniformed butler greeted Gabriel at the door to Seraphina's Los Altos Hills mansion later that evening. He stepped aside and gestured for Gabriel to enter. "Ms. James will be with you momentarily." Gabriel thanked him as he walked in, marveling at the stunning architecture of the home. The high ceilings likely reached a height of 13 or 14 feet. Walls of glass on all four sides offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the mountains. Even with all the things he could afford as a billionaire now, he obviously didn't live as extravagantly as Seraphina. There was a difference between old money and new money. He wondered if the evening he had planned for them would meet her expectations. Doubt began to flood his mind as he glanced down at his outfit. His slate gray tuxedo with its black bow tie fit him well, but he felt like an awkward teenager in it. Perhaps it was because the style was meant for someone attending their senior prom. It was the look he'd been going for a couple of hours ago when he'd come up with his grand plan to impress Seraphina. He wondered if he should just scratch all that and fly her to Paris like any other billionaire would do. "Hello, Gabe." He lifted his gaze to the top of the staircase where Seraphina stood and swallowed hard. She looked more gorgeous than ever with her blonde hair pinned up. Soft tendrils fell around her face, which had just the right amount of makeup to showcase her natural beauty. Her wine-red dress accentuated her curves with a plunging neckline and hugged her slender hips. A high slit revealed one long, toned leg and a diamond-encrusted heel as she strode down the stairs. The sweet floral scent of her perfume filled his senses as she neared. "Sarah, you look amazing." "Thank you. You look quite dapper yourself, like a handsome boy I used to know." Her flirty tone put him at ease. He released the breath he'd been holding. "It's not my usual getup, but I needed to look the part tonight." She gave him a curious smile. "The part of a high schooler? Is that why you had an exact replica of my prom dress delivered to me to wear tonight? How did you even find this?" "You can find most anything on the internet." Gabriel grinned, knowing he had surprised her well. "I hope you'll humor me. I racked my brain trying to come up with something to do for our first date. I mean, where do you take a woman who can buy herself anything? I thought it would be more meaningful to give you an experience instead." Her eyes widened. "An experience? Don't tell me, we're going to prom together?" "You could say that. I reserved the Ritz-Carlton in the city where we had our original prom. I made a few playlists for us to dance to. There's 90s boy bands, old school hip-hop, and some new stuff the kids are listening to these days. I also booked a photographer who specializes in prom pictures. You know, the ones with cheesy poses." He hesitated, furrowing his brows. "This all sounded better in my head when I was planning it. If you'd rather do something else," Seraphina placed a hand on his arm. "No. Gabe, this is perfect and so sweet. It takes a man with a big heart to come up with something so thoughtful. I love it." "Yeah?" When she nodded firmly, he offered his arm to her. "This way then." He led her to their waiting limousine and slid into the car after her. They settled onto the plush seat as their driver closed the door. She turned to him with a coy smile. "Rumor has it you were going to ask me to prom senior year. What happened?" He smirked. "What happened was I waited too long. By the time I got up the nerve to ask you, you'd already agreed to go with the quarterback of the football team." Frowning, she remarked, "I wish you had been my date that night. I'm sure I would have had a much better time. At least I wouldn't have spent it moping." "Moping?" he asked. "If I remember correctly, you looked more angry than sad. That's because your date was all over you. You guys were practically attached at the hip." Gabriel couldn't help chuckling. His response earned him a look of indignation from Seraphina. He placed his arm around her shoulders. "There," he declared, drawing her to his side. "There's no need to be jealous anymore. I'm all yours." Her red lips curved into a satisfied smile. "Much better. And for the record, I was not jealous. I was merely concerned for your safety." He nodded knowingly. "Of course. It's safe to assume then that you were at least a little bit interested in me?" She rolled her eyes. You're not going to let it go, are you? All right, fine. Yes, I was. Happy now? He took her hand and brought it to his lips for a soft kiss. She gasped as he turned it over and placed another kiss on her palm. Very happy. I only wish we hadn't wasted so much time fighting in the past. I feel like I missed out on so much of your life. A lot's happened since graduation. She squeezed his hand. It's not too late to catch up. If I've learned anything recently, it's to make the most of the time you've got. We have a second chance to resume our relationship from where we left off. Except, she flashed him a coy smile, we're both on the same page now. The same page, I like the sound of that, he agreed. No more competing with each other or trying to get the upper hand. I want to get to know you, the girl I fell for the first time I laid eyes on you in English class freshman year. Freshman year? You barely said a word to me that year. Believe me, I tried. It was hard to know how to impress you. We were from completely different backgrounds, but that's the exact reason why you caught my eye. I asked you to be my lab partner sophomore year, remember? I appreciated how you weren't like all the other kids I grew up with. You worked hard for what you wanted. You had a drive and a passion that told me you'd go places one day. I'm not surprised you made it to CEO before I did. Thanks, but I did have some help. The funds I needed to start my company, that was a gift from my father. I couldn't have done it otherwise. But you chose to use the money for good. You're using it to help people like my father. I can't thank you enough. Her smile shone with gratitude. Of course, he replied. I'm going to do all I can to help him. I know you will. I believe in you, Gabe. If you could get me to stop fighting with you, she winked, you can pretty much do anything. Her words sent a thrill through his body. If there was one thing he wanted to win, it was Seraphina's heart. Knowing she felt the same for him as he felt for her was a sweet victory indeed. He shifted in his seat to face her, fingering a lock of hair that framed her beautiful face. You make me feel like I can do anything. I think your name suits you well. You're like my own personal angel. She laughed. Then you must be mine. Me? Your name, it's like the angel Gabriels. He grinned. You're right. Look at us, two angels. We're a great match. Her blue eyes twinkled like the stars, full of longing and hope. Sighing happily, she agreed, a match made in heaven. Gabriel took her in his arms, enjoying the feel of her soft curves against his firm chest. One thing he was sure of, he had met his match in every way. He and Seraphina were equals on the playing fields in both war and love. Now that they were on the same side, he looked forward to more of the latter. As the limousine sped toward the skyline of the city, Gabriel looked forward to a bright evening, an even brighter future, with Seraphina. She was right, they were a perfect pair. Two billionaire angels ready to experience a little heaven on earth. The end. Thank you for listening to this audiobook. To learn more about Liwen Waiho's other books, please visit her website at liwenho.com.